Go, Sam.
Yeah.
Anthidium.
Well, we did Anthidium, but we sorry, I'm doing two things at once here. We also, I want to bring up the new annex picture. We went through Anthidiellum a little bit, so enough to talk about boreale versus notatum. And Mike's key did not have perplexum, so we will jump into that again. I guess I don't have a picture of the new annex. Anyway, we can talk about that another day. But our new facility, new old facility, will have plenty of room for doing lectures and guides and teaching, as well as 1,000 drawers of specimens. Okay, so Anthidiellum, as I mentioned, Mike was talking about boreale in his guide versus notatum. Boreale was split out of notatum a little while ago, within the last couple of years. And I'll talk now about the difference between notatum and perplexum, which is a southeastern species. And I'll share my screen here first. And there we go. I think it's being shared. Okay, do we see the map?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. So notatum is a very widespread species. Yeah, it's split, as Mike mentioned the last time, into a number of different subspecies, which could later become species out west. In the east, we have a population that's fairly discrete, but as you go to the south, it does a color shift that will look a lot like Anthidiellum perplexum, which is in blue here. So Anthidiellum perplexum is, I would call it a sand specialist. It's probably going to bump up into Virginia and may bump out to the west a bit once we do a little more surveying. But it is as you'll see, I have them lined up, an ochre species. However, it's tricky because in the same area, the notatums turn that same color range too. So differentiating, if we jump now to the Discover Life guides, to move this, can I move that out of the way? I'm trying to move. There's a screen control thing up at the top. What happens if I, nope. Oh, there it goes. Okay, good. I got rid of it. Now, if we go here to the Anthidiellum key, which includes all the Western species, and now includes Mike's differences between notatum and boreale. We're adding over time, slowly, thank you, Francis Millam, the species that Mike has and his wording too. So you'll have multiple chances to get the species right using the Discover Life guides. Now, and then ultimately we'll put in more and more of other people's identification, characters, and keys, and just put them into the same format. Okay, so when we look at the females, we see here notatum versus perplexum, and we're looking at the head, the ocelli, and between the ocelli are two bumps. And we are going to switch now to the viewer of, let's see, I had it up. Oh, there it is. Okay. So now when we take a look at this through the microscope, this is notatum. This is the northern sort of nominate thing, very bright yellow. Perplexum is never this color. And you see between the ocelli here, two raised areas, which I think are relatively straightforward to see. And there are no pits on top of the little ridges. I'm going to wiggle the lighting a little bit. So maybe that will, sorry about the phone interruption, illuminate that a little bit better. I'll twist it too. So this is something to look for in any Anthidiine because a few of them show these characteristics, like in Dianthidium and things. Okay, so in addition, Anthidiellum, it's pretty straightforward. In the feet, we're looking at a female, and the Anthidiellums are smaller, so just size alone will discriminate the two. And both have very dark wings, but perplexum will have even darker wings. But this is the primary character to split them apart. We'll flip back here to the guide. Wow, someone is very persistent. Natalie Corona. I'm going to give this to Sydney. Might not. Sorry, we're having another lab move and then taking all their leftovers. So if we look here, it's basically size and these ocelli patterns. So let's take a look now at Anthidiellum perplexum. Will be larger in the females. Males have some other characters which we'll show here. So first thing to see here is the color. We can bring this into view. Yes, it has yellow, but many of the yellow sections are surrounded by and invaded by this burnt umber cover, which just isn't present in the northern populations. But like I said, this can look almost exactly the same in the populations of notatum in the south, in the same area where perplexum is. And I've caught them at the exactly same spot. Okay, so now though, first of all, I think in general you might notice that the ocelli seem a little bit smaller here. Oh, let me just bump up my cursor size. Because it's not very large. Get it to talk. And about that. Back, better. Okay, so lateral ocelli, in between is just a entire field of pits. Clearly no mound, clearly no difference in that pitting field, even if you didn't quite see the mound, and some colorful fibers that have been added in. So that's pretty much it for the females. I'll show you the back here so you get a vibe on this. This is noticeably, if you had a string, going to be a larger species. And here's your color vibe on it. Lots of amber types of things, burnt orange, burnt umber, whatever you want to call it. Very, very dark wings, but they both have darkish wings. Okay, so I'm going to flip now to perplexum males. So they have the same deal going on in terms of color, size, as well as the range and the bumps on their thing. But additionally, on T7, which I'm going to have to rotate this more because it's the abdomen, as many bees do, has in the male curls way under. Let's bring that back here. And hopefully we can see it. So the rim of T7 is in the male triangular towards the tip, and instead of blunt. I'm going to rotate that even a little bit more because I'm not sure it's expressing it completely well. I'm going to take off the tag. And try one more time here. Hopefully the pin will not be in the way. Yeah, that's better. Bring up the magnification. Take it down. And there you can see. So T7 very clearly, rounded edges, but triangular and pointed. And then we will flip to notatum, in which that end will be truncate or squared off. Quite different. So a lot of this is the kind of complex of characters you would want to have for any species of closely related ones that would allow you to tell them apart instead of irritatingly subtle things. All right, so I'm going to bring the magnification up, looking at notatum. And you can see that the shape is quite different, maybe not exactly straight across, but clearly slightly concave rather than triangular and flush across. How lovely a character is that? Okay, so I think that the guides actually go out to the west, so we don't really have Western specimens at this point. So I'm going to say, check that out yourself. And as usual, any alterations or question marks that you don't like, let us know so that we can put it in the list to update. Francis is updating Anthidiellum and may have done it already. I guess if there are questions now on the Anthidiellum front, let us know. I have one. We have one? Okay.
Yeah. Nicole asks, Mike's key mentions a narrow impunctate line on T6 of boreal females versus notatum lacking that. Mm-hmm. Can you show a T6 of a female notatum?
Yeah, sadly, I do not have boreali, but I do have these. And I don't know about perplexum, but boreali is a lover of the pea family. Is that a male? I think that's a male, sorry. This one, I'm just checking the other microscope. Yeah. So, and also seems to be okay sometimes with, is that really, it looks like that pattern of blocky spots is also, yeah, that's a female, is also a really good general vibe of an Anthidium, with the stripes at the top going into the blocky squares. I'm going to rotate it a little bit more. But bird's foot trefoil and wheat clovers, they're on it. Midsummer thing. Fast, that's one of the problems. Okay, so T6 is here. It's the last segment in females. And Mike says boreali has an impunctate line, right? So that would mean impunctate being the fancy name for no pits. So a pitless line through here. And I see no sign of that in this particular specimen. Not a surprise, with pits entirely across. Is that sufficient? Do people see that character there?
Seems like it to me, Nicole. Okay. Yes, she says thank you. She also says that she just identified the first Anthidiellum from Minnesota, so I'm trying to key it out to species. Today is very timely.
Yeah. That would seem like a candidate for boreali up there. So, okay, I'll move on now we'll shift gears and go to Dianthidium. So when we talk about Dianthidium, let's put a specimen under there and talk about the general characters first. I think we're going to start with males. So let's work with curvatum, maybe one of the most common ones. And I don't know about all the species, but many of these are sunflower specialists. So annual sunflowers, but also the big perennials that you see in Texas and along roadsides and things in the Midwest. And then further to the west are often inhabited by these speedy little amphibians, and they're fast too. Okay, So a couple things that define Dianthidium and also help you differentiate it from Trichusa, which we'll talk about next, but I don't know if we have time today. So this is the propodial pronotal collar area, and you can see that it's projecting up and is clear. So transparent there. And I believe the pronotal lobe, but we'll check because I may be mixing up my characters here. So very transparent, very tall. That's almost always an indication. And then let's look and see what's going on elsewhere. I'll also say that the tegula, or the base of the wing protector, is also almost always massive. Now, it's possible that Trichusa, which is probably its nearest neighbor, has that too, but I'm not sure. But yeah, you can see, so here's a pronotal lobe, and here's the pronotal angle or ridge here defining. So this is all the pronotum here. This is the lobe that comes in. And this area is also transparent, but this is transparent. And I believe maybe, and I don't know if it's definitive, that around the edge of the very large tegula is a transparent rim, but this is mostly what you're looking for. Now, this is also a pretty good angle to see the omalis. Omalis, I don't know how it's exactly pronounced. We'll angle it again. This is another thing that separates us from Trichusa, because Trichusa, the omalis basically is a front leg holder. So imagine like a transformer. You can tuck all your legs in, move those legs into there, bend your head over, and you're just surrounded by armor. But in Dianthidium, and this happens in other species too, but they're often these heavily armored ones. This is what would be called the anterior face of the pleura or the mesepisternum, or the, I guess, is it? Yeah, mesepisternum. And it's got a very sharp transition. Usually it's not pitted inside because this is going to tuck in. This is a sharp angle, whereas in most species, this is just simply rounded over. The anterior face, which they all have as it comes towards the front, is simply a continuation of the side face, and there's no particular stop-start point. And in Dianthidium, there is, and it's not clear here, but we'll change the angle, and you'll see that there's also associated a raised line, and the extent of that raised line is sometimes used in identifying some of the species. In other words, they all have it, but not necessarily to the same extent. All right, let me bring in some more light here because we're dealing with darkness in a tucked in area, and we could use a greater amount of light. So I'm going to change it to 400, which will blow it out elsewhere, but hopefully when we magnify it, you'll be able to, I have to press 4 things to get in here, see the omalis better. All right, so there's the front leg, and the carina is what we're going to be looking for. The front leg is where it's going to tuck in next to the head, and the omalis is going to protect it. And there is a carina, which I'm not going to spend too much time on this. And I believe this is the species that has only a partial carina. So maybe I'll push this up a little bit more. So a carina is just another fancy name for a raised line or ridge. Here that carina is, and then it stops, right? But this is still quite a a sharp transition, at least at the upper part. So I believe for this species, which should be curvatum, that the others continues down. This might be also indicative, but let's jump to Mike's guide because he does have a nice Dianthidium guide now that we have toured the morphology, and I'm going to knock back the lighting here to more like, let's do 200. That's good. Okay. And bring this up. 4 buttons to press. And now go to Mike's guide here. Okay. So in looking at Mike's guide, I don't have some of these Midwestern specimens, but I do have a fair enough number that will be able to see examples of the characters, I think. So Texanum, very rare, but everything else has the alternative characters here, which we'll go through. So let's take our curvatum. I'm going to take that off and turn it upside down, and you'll see under the front that the hindcoxy, and sometimes the front, depends on the where we are in the guide, hindcoxy each with a short, sharp triangular projection poking out from the tip of it. And let's just start with that. So go here, bring this down, and bring that in, and it is unhelpful to have a male. So take that. Oh, wait, we are working on males, I think. Let's see how his guide starts. No, he starts with females. Okay, so take that down to there and bring in a female. Take that on. And look at the hindcoxy here. Pin, possibly. No, I think we could see half of it. So the coxy is the last segment before the leg meets the body. Leg being something that doesn't really translate from our leg to their leg super well. But I may have to rotate this a little bit more to get that in there. Sure will. There we go. Okay, so orientation, here's the coxy, here's the spine, and these are and then this is the trochanter femur tibia.
Hey, Sam. Somehow you, like, I don't know if you right-clicked or something, but there is a little window on your screen.
So there is.
Thank you.
There we go. Oops. Oh, interesting. That might have been a way to get to full screen without having to do 4 things. How did I do that? Anyway, okay. So here are these spines. So Texana would not have them. All the others have them. And some will have them on the front trochanter. So let's go to another character here to look for podial triangle smooth, so not pitted, at least on the lower half, and occipital carina present laterally. So I think this is a pretty self-explanatory thing. So propodial, maybe we'll look at the propodial triangle. So these names are used differently by different authors. Mike and I are perhaps old school, and we use propodial triangle a lot. Other people use something whose name is so clunky that I can't remember what it is at the moment. Someone could put that in the chat. Lots of nomenclatural things. There's no real, like, it has to be like this kind of thing in this world. So I always like to go with the easiest to remember and most explanatory. Like instead of saying impunctate, I say has no pits, even though that's a couple more words. All right, so let's look at Mike's wording here. Mike's wording on this is occipital carina present laterally. So different people call this different things. So here's the eye, here's the top of the head, here's the back of the head. You can see in a shiny linear light, this is the carina. So occipital usually is having to do with the back of the head. And so some people will call this area between here and there the gena. So I don't think he uses that term. So if we look at it, laterally, yeah, he says he's including the occipital carina laterally, so that would be lateral to the edge of the head. On the gena, I usually refer to it as just the cheek because people get what a cheek is, I think, a little more easily than a gena or the occipital carina. So what you're looking at is a carina, raised line, but a lot of times it's like as if the cheek goes down and then turns up a little bit at the end, forming this raised ridge along the backside. So that's present, and I presume if we go back to the guide that it's not present in Texana. Propodia triangle, occipital carina absent laterally. So presumably when Mike talks about laterally, I wish he were here, he would be talking about that it's absent on the edges of the cheek, but perhaps at the top of the head. Again, need some clarification there. And we don't have the species to look at. So now look at all these wonderful morphological characters we get to explore. So
I'm going to interrupt real quick about the propodial triangle. David suggests propodial enclosure equals triangle, ? And Jean offers metapostnotum.
Yes, both of those are alternative words. In the case of, sometimes they don't look very triangular. Other times they might call it the dorsal face, but there's really no dorsal face because here, let's go to it. When we look at a lot of the Anthidiines and even the megachyle, because the propodium just basically goes complete vertical on after the metanotum. So, okay, I think this might show it. So recall that we're not seeing it, but the pin is going through the scutum. There's a scutellum, relatively large feature, almost always, perhaps always, in the same plane as the scutum. And then other stuff can happen. So in a lot of the helictids, the metanotum, which is, I think, pretty much always a relatively thin joining body part. And body parts, are separated by sutures. So there's a suture, there's a suture. So that's the metanotum. But we're now talking that these features are in a vertical plane, whereas in Helictidae and a lot of other things, Andrena, they're going to be in a horizontal plane, and it doesn't turn down until you get to the rear face of the propodium. So the next thing is the propodium, and it's already in a vertical plane here. So I think a lot of this was generated maybe by people who worked a lot on Andrena and some of the more common species. And this triangle area, you're seeing only part of it right here of the propodium. It's still present here, but it was more visible on top of the, because it was horizontal on the Andrenidae and the and Caletidae. No, not so much Caletidae, but at least Andrenidae and Halictidae. So this is the propodial triangle, the propodial enclosure, the metapostnotum. Ugh, what a horrible word. And similar things. Sometimes, in this case, would not be the dorsal enclosure because it's not dorsal. Dorsal meaning top. So you can see how shiny this is. I can't remember what character we were looking at, but we'll go a little bit closer since we have it here to talk. Podium. And recall, a lot of things get munged up by the fact that someone determined that this segment, the propodium, is actually an ancient segment of the abdomen that got stuck onto the thorax. So by the arcane jargon rules of entomology, maybe not even a rule, they decided, well, we can't call this the thorax and this the abdomen because some of the abdomen is stuck here. All right, won't go too far into that, but my point is, like, if I say abdomen on a Dianthidium and thorax on a Dianthidium, everyone knows what that is. But if I start using some of the alternative words, then it just becomes a roadblock for learning about bees, I think. But I'll get off my soapbox. All right, propodial triangle. Let's see what he said about that. So in Texanum versus the rest. So this would be one of the other alternative to Texanum things. So propodial triangle, smooth, not pitted, at least on the lower half. And so we saw that. Occipital carina, present laterally, inner antennal area unmodified. We saw the occipital carina interantennal area has bumps in Texana. So it's a pair of flattened bumps, which we would want to see if we had a specimen, but we don't. So we're going to not bother because it's just basically a uniform area of pitting, like almost all species have. In the alternative universe, the bumps here are of interest. Clipial margin also without small teeth. So as is most species of bees, there's just a smooth line going around the clipius. Again, I don't think we need to see that. And the Texanum is much more like Anthidium manicatum, which we saw the last time, which has a whole series of tiny pie, I call them pie margin-like bumps around the rim of the clipius. And mandible usually with a pre-apical or medial tooth. I'm going to show that because Trichusa has no teeth whatsoever down there. It's just one big smooth line. It's the species group that would be most similar, but there are plenty of alternative views here. I believe Dianthidium uses resin and other things to make nests out of. Someone could look that up. That would be awesome. And so these big flat blade-like, as well as Anthidiellum at least. Anthidiums tend to be more fiber-oriented. Maybe that's why they have teeth and not big flat spatulas. So in looking here, we have the edge. I think this one might be easier to see, the one on the lower part of your screen. It's lapping the other anyway. So here we have the tip, which is usually would be called the first tooth, and maybe it'd be simple if it was only that, and then there's a second tooth, and sometimes these corners are called third teeth, depending on who you're talking to. So in Trichusa, this is just big one broad blade. Fun. Okay, so I think we have gone through the anti-Texana identification marks. Let's see where we go to next. We're still in the females. Then we come to concinnum versus the remaining species. We have curvatum on deck here. Concinnum is much smaller than curvatum. So if we look at the alternative, since we have the species here already, area just behind the we get to do even more fun work on difficult to see sometimes characters. I'm loading this up. So the post-spiracular carina, so the area just behind the propodial post-spiracular carina impunctate. So there's a patch behind the spiracle, which does have a carina, so a little raised area on the propodium that has no pits. That's what we're going to look for. And let's see if we can find that here. It's hard to see. So we have a couple problems. One, wings. Other is abdomen. Let's shift it to here and see how I need to approach this. So these spiracles, that's like the, I don't know, breathing port, let's call it, for the species. And often that area is got some modifications going on. Can I see it there? They're small. Okay, so we're at the edge right now. So this is just maybe a good place to start. All right. There is the scutum, scutellum, tegula. This is the mesepisternum or the pleura, the side. We're looking at the propodium. Here's the carina between one of the other plates, maybe the medepisternum. And here is the spiracle. Let's get even closer if we can. So this is one of a couple breathing holes for this animal. And it's a little bit hard to see. We're going to change the angle here, but there's a carina off to this side. And then when Mike talks about behind, I believe he's talking about this surface, which we can't see right now. And that should be shiny and not hairy in this species, in all the others except for concinnum. So let's see if we can see. The problem is now angle of the abdomen and angle of the wings preventing us. So a little trick is that sometimes you can bend the abdomen with your finger and it won't snap off. No, not great for specimens, but sometimes you have these really long strings of things and you really do want to see in there. I don't think I've ever had them actually snap off. So, and a lot of times this is a rich area, particularly osmia, that you really do need to see some stuff. So you might play around with that on more expendable specimens. See where the limits are. All right, I switched to the other side with hope that we could see that area. And it's hard to see here. And yeah. Right, so it's right in there. That's the spiracle carina, but the wings are in the way. So I'm going to snap the wing back. So another little trick, but more deleterious to the specimen is you can take a pin. I'm not going to try and show that under while we have it on under the microscope, but you take a pin, you run it up to the base of the wing, well, or two of them, and then you just lift it. Most of the time, it just cracks it because it's just done, and the wing stays on. But again, you've now made it looser, and it's not a great thing to do for specimens. There's a big clot of stuff here. Let me see if I can get that off. But
while you're doing that, let me read something Jean just shared.
Okay.
Excuse me. Permissioner 2007. Nests of Dianthidium usually consist of several cells that are made of pebbles stuck together by a matrix of resin and attached to rock surfaces or twigs of bushes or trees. Some species, however, make resin cells using pebbles and chaff in holes in banks or in holes in wood or stems.
So it sounds like, thank you, Jean. Sounds like resin is like a theme, and the exact location is variable by species. Okay, so I've snapped off the wing. I haven't snapped it off. I snapped it back. It's still there. And now we're going to zero in because you can see this area. I'm trying to get the angle right, though. This is just a tough one. It's worth a little bit of time here. There it is at the upper right, to locate, because it's just one of those head scratchers. And you know, depending on the species group, sometimes it's useful to talk about it. All right, so I'm going to put my glasses on here. I'm going to boost up the, so this is the area. Here's the rhina and the spiracle is in there, but this is not enough light and it's dark. So we're going to bump it up to 400 and there. And I think, yeah, I want to bend the specimen more to the side here, over, to get the look. You can see, like, this is not a straightforward, oops, just knocked the specimen off its pin. Not a straightforward thing. All right, let's get in there. Ooh, nice. Okay, so this is good. I don't know why it's so nice, but you can see here's the spiracle, here's the carina, this is the metanotum, this, or that might be the metanotum. It's not clear. The scutellum. And it's going a little bit out of focus. So the area they're talking about, Mike is talking about, should be, when he talks about behind, it should be right here. So again, it's one of those things that you would like more pictures and clarity. David, are you listening? So this is the area that's relatively not hairy. In fact, it's not hairy at all, and relatively not pitted. And we're going to look at concinnum and try and find that too. Okay, so backing off. Very nice. You can see that carina very nicely there. A lot of times, again, it's dark and stuff's going on. So I feel good about being able to see that one. All right, let's go back to the guide here. So behind that area, it's unpitted, glabrous, so without hairs, shiny, and then also clippus yellow, at least in part. That's straightforward, we're not going to bother. Omalis variable in our species, which we'll see later, it's got that partial one. But in Concinna, the omalis is incomplete, and we are going to be looking at the area behind the carina again, but it's pitted, hairy, not shiny. So let's see if we can now find that in our concinnum specimen. My sleeve has been doing damage to these specimens. All right, so I have a concinnum. Let me get rid of this, which also I think has a black clypeus, which is super useful, much more easy to spot than a spherical, mysterious spherical item. All right, concinnum. This one has its wing already bent up, and I chose it for that. I have more specimens on that one. And let's, I don't know, I've got a lot of light on there now. Let's continue with that and see if we can just get right in there again. Bum, bum. Well, one of the things they did say it was hairy in that area. Trying to get oriented here myself. So this should be the propodium axially. Is that a leg? All right, I need to look at the specimen. Find it. Oh, I see. That's a area of damage. We're going further down. And see if we can find it here. One of the problems is Mike's use of the word behind. Because while I believe this is concinnum, I'm not super convinced. I'm looking exactly on the right side of the spherical. Darn it, why is Mike gone? So this is the area in here. Got one of the problems is the abdomen. So here's the unpitted area of the propodial triangle. So this is a propodium, and the spherical area, which is difficult to see, maybe because it is hairy, is over in this area here. So this, I believe, is the carina right there, and this area right here is the area that's pitted and hairy, which certainly matches that. I'm going to do one more attempt at a shallower angle at seeing that. We may have to, Mike has no internet, so we can't bug him today, but it'd be nice to revisit this with him at some point. What are we doing for time there, Claire?
You got 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Get out of this land here in a second. But I know I just don't, I think that last view was the best one. We're at the edge. Yeah, we're looking at kind of straight down now. And I just don't think I can get a better shot of it than that. Anyway, the other one showed up the carina nicely. You have a general idea of where we're looking. And in Concinnum, we're looking at a black clypeus, which we don't need to see because it's just simply black. And let's see what other characters we can pick up here. in our exploration. Okay, so back up again. So we're looking at this, the difference between concinnum and the other species that are following in terms of Clippius all black. That seemed like the easy one. Omalis incomplete. So we saw an incomplete omalis on the other one, but it does have an incomplete one, but if you had a species that had complete, you know it would not be concinnum. But if it was incomplete, that doesn't necessarily discriminate the two, because Mike is saying here omalis variable. Okay, so I don't have ulkei, but I do have the remaining. So we look at the alternatives to ulkei. So punctures or pitting of scutum very close, but with very narrow, shiny interspaces and similar in size to the pits on the scutellum. Okay, we can see that and take a look at that. Omalis incomplete, all right. And I guess this is the one where the omalis is complete, sadly. So we saw the incomplete omalis in the curvatum that we just saw at the beginning of the Dianthidium adventure. And I'm going to pull out that curvatum again, and we'll look at the pitting on the scutum. And let's just see if there's anything else. Mesopleura, all black. So that would be the mesepisternum, or simply the pleura, as a lot of people call it, without a yellow spot. Okay, so gosh, those are much nicer characters. Let's bring the lighting back down to 100, maybe 200. And let's take this specimen down there. Bring this up. So the pitting is, in this species group, will be tight, but there's shiny spaces in between, so that's not overlapping. And it's similar in size to the scutellum. A little bit difficult to tell since the scutellum is very light colored in this case. Similar, although my eye says that the scutellum is a little bit bigger than there. And also, let's see, I think he said medially, because here you can see now these pits are beginning to overlap and or at least touch. Let's see in Mike's guide here what he's talking about. So the alternative, so the ulkei, pictures of scutum very dense and contiguous, so basically all touching without shiny interspaces, and smaller than the pits on the scutellum, and which do have shiny, though narrow, interspaces, and the omalis complete. So here the alternative would be pits of scutum very close, but with narrow, shiny interspaces and similar size to the pits on the scutellum. Omalis incomplete, yes. Mesopleura all black without yellow spot. So like a lot of these things, you want more than one character. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, that seems to be, to me, to be ambiguous. Like, do I see the shiny interspaces in between? I'd want to see the alternative species in order to determine that. And I also think that the pits on the scutellum are a little bit bigger. My eye, at least. So let's look at some of these other features, which basically are what's going on the mesepisternum, or mesopleura as he calls it, and get in there and see if it's all black as per not concinnum and appropriate for curvatum. Why is it not focusing? Oh, there we go. All right, so here's our incomplete carina. I'll focus it a little bit better here of the omalis. Here's the lateral carina of the cheek, or however we called it. And when we're looking at this, so the mesopisternum or the mesopleura is the section below the front wing. So there's the tegula, the front wing, and this whole section would be what we're looking for, and it is indeed all black without a yellow spot. Many, many times it seems like an embellishment within bees is to stick some yellow right in the middle of that. So welcome to the ambiguous world of some of these characters. Okay, so now we have, so we've kind of explored the differences between the missing in action ulkei and the others, which include curvatum and simile. So Mike has a note here, which is, I think on the books, they're separate species. Basically, curvatum is southern and simile is up north. And he, as you can read, says that the coloration is less up north, but everything else seems to be the same. So probably they're the same thing. And there's a differentiation between this group and subrufulum, which is again a Western and more an uncommon species. So here, the four-coxa with a short, blunt, nipple-like hispid process between the four trochanters. Let's see if we can find that. So the four trochanters, so four meaning the basically front legs, and trochanters would not be the coxa, which we saw and looked at the last time. I think I misspoke when I said that the we were also going to be looking for the blunt tip to the coxae in the front legs, because it looks like it's some kind of bump, let's call it. Here, need to focus on getting this in view between the front trochanters. Trochanters are the second set of leg segments. All right, so should be visible. So here, coxa, there is these little projections like on the hind coxa, but it sounds like that's not what he's talking about. Here's the trochanters, and Mike says it's not something I'm familiar with. Four coxae each with a very blunt nipple-like hispid process, but it says between the four trochanters. I don't know why between the four I'm not sure. We'll have to talk to Mike. But if we look here, we're seeing the same process. Let's see if I can zoom it up. That we saw in the hind coxa.
Sam, I'm wondering if it doesn't, if he's not indicating to like kind of the bottom of the, moving around. Yeah. So the place where we usually look for a spine, right? There's clearly some stuff hanging out there, but we could maybe give him some wording feedback.
Yeah, that might be, yeah. So, for example, I think that the use of the four trochanters threw me off, because this is the same kind of thing that happens in Nomata. So there's these front coxal spines and they're in exactly the same place. What's their use? I don't know. But some of the groups in Nomata very nicely, because there's not a lot of characters sometimes that are in Nomata, have spines. Sometimes they're blunt, sometimes they're quite long. And this is a very similar kind of circumstance. So these have them, and subrufulum, if that's the right way you pronounce it, do not have them. So, and the trochanters, I guess, was just I don't know, it just distracted me. So I think that might be a good place to stop, and we can work on the males next. Or no, we were on the females. Oh, maybe okay, yeah, got it. Did I go through the males? I did. I think I went through everything then.
Yeah, we got through the very tidy, very nice, neat
Okay.
package we just got through.
Okay.
So we could, I'll make a note in my things to just like loop back around with that with Mike next week. Are
Yeah.
we meeting next week? I feel like I thought that there was a thing happening.
I think we
Oh,
are.
yes. Next week, we're gonna have Jamie Strange on to talk about bumblebees. It is the following week that we are not on.
Okay. Yeah, so Eastern bumblebees with Jamie. We can ask all about your questions about the tricky to ID pairs. And is he limiting? I can't remember. Is he limiting himself to the east now? Because he's from the west, so, or at least spent quite a bit of time at the Logan lab.
Yeah, I actually think that he might be talking to I need to call him anyway for a tech check, and I will know the answer to the question then.
Okay.
Great, and I'll send out another email of a reminder email because that's a fun, thing, and you can tell your friends about it and have come visit us and learn about bumblebees with Jamie.
Okay.
Great.
Do we have any other questions or comments about the colorful?
There's nothing else in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, fam.
All right.
I'll stop the recording and we'll see you next week.
All right. We will be off scavenging lab equipment. Wish us luck. It's your lab too.